Before we begin, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments what you think really happened here. Because once you hear this story, you'll realize some prisons don't just disappear, they're erased. The demolition, the explosion wasn't supposed to happen that early. At 6:12 a.m., a controlled demolition team stood ready beside the crumbling remains of Borgo Prison, a forgotten structure tucked behind newer buildings near the Vatican walls. The air smelled of whetstone and diesel. Engineers had cleared the perimeter. City officials had signed off. Cameras were rolling for a quiet historical redevelopment project. Then the first blast cracked through the Roman morning. Dust roared into the sky, swallowing centuries of stone in seconds. Tourists scattered. Windows rattled along the narrow streets. And when the smoke began to thin, a worker started screaming. He was pointing at the rubble. At first, it looked like debris, fractured beams, and collapsed masonry. But as emergency crews pushed closer, shapes began to emerge through the dust. Bones, not just fragments. A skull, half exposed, an arm twisted beneath shattered brick. And beneath that, something darker, a metal chain fused into the earth. Detective Alessio Conti arrived within 20 minutes. Tall, late 30s, Roman-born, with the kind of steady gaze that unsettled suspects. He had handled political scandals, organized crime, even cold cases buried for decades. But this was different. Borgo Prison had been closed for over a century. Officially, it was processed into administrative storage before abandonment. No records indicated unmarked graves beneath its foundation. Conti stepped carefully through the debris. Forensic units were already sealing the area. News vans gathered at the edges of the barricade. "How many?" he asked. "For now, one confirmed skeleton," replied Inspector Marta Greco, brushing dust from her gloves. "But ground-penetrating scans are showing voids beneath the west wing." Conti studied the broken foundation. Void as in collapsed tunnels, void as in hidden chambers. The word hung in the air. Borgo Prison wasn't just another abandoned jail. It had once played a central role in Rome's justice system during the late 1800s, a holding facility for political detainees, radicals, and those accused of crimes against the papal state. And it had a reputation. Trials were swift. Records were sparse. Some prisoners were transferred to public courts. Others simply vanished. By noon, archaeologists and forensic teams were working side by side. The first skeleton appeared male, approximately 30 to 40 years old. Wrist bones bore signs of prolonged restraint. The skull showed blunt trauma, but it was impossible to determine whether it occurred before or after death. Then they found the second chamber, a narrow stone corridor, sealed off with bricks that didn't match the original structure. Someone had intentionally concealed it. Inside, investigators discovered another skeleton, this one still partially shackled to a rusted iron ring bolted into the wall. Inspector Greco exhaled slowly. This wasn't accidental burial. Conti crouched beside the remains. No, this was containment. By evening, headlines swept across Europe and the United States. Bodies found beneath historic Roman prison. Dark secrets of Borgo Prison revealed. City officials moved quickly, labeling it a historical anomaly. A relic of harsher times. A tragic but distant chapter. Conti didn't believe in convenient history. He requested access to the prison's archival records. Most were stored in municipal archives. Some were missing entirely. 3 ledger books covering the years 1892 to 1895 had gaps, entire pages torn cleanly from the spine. Coincidence? Greco asked. Someone removed those pages deliberately, Conti replied. Forensic analysis provided the first shock. The skeleton from the sealed corridor was dated not to the 1800s, but to the early 1900s, nearly 2 decades after Borgo Prison was officially decommissioned. Greco stared at the report. "You're telling me someone used this place after it was shut down?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The demolition crew was interviewed thoroughly. None reported seeing prior signs of disturbance. No recent construction. No access points. Yet when technicians examined the iron shackles more closely, they found something impossible to ignore. The corrosion pattern suggested the metal had been exposed to moisture and air much later than the prison's closure date, as if the chamber had been opened and resealed. That night, Conti stood alone outside the fenced-off ruins. Floodlights illuminated the broken walls. He imagined what Borgo once looked like. Prisoners marched through heavy gates, Trials conducted behind closed doors, verdicts whispered in corridors thick with power. A soft vibration buzzed in his pocket. "A no number," he answered. A distorted voice spoke quietly. "You're digging up things that were meant to stay buried." Condi's grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" Silence, then a click. He stared at the dark screen. The next morning brought another development. Dr. Elena Rizzi, a historian specializing in Rome's judicial evolution, arrived at the site unannounced. She had spent years studying Borgo Prison's role in transitional justice between papal authority and modern Italian governance. "They weren't just criminals held here," she explained. "Some were political threats, journalists, reformists, even members of powerful families who knew too much." Conti raised an eyebrow. "Powerful families," Rizzi nodded. "The Montaluggi family, for example? They controlled key judicial appointments in the late 19th century." Greco flipped through old clippings. "The same Montaluggi family that now funds half the city's redevelopment projects." Rizzi's expression darkened. "The very same." Later that afternoon, forensic teams uncovered something else inside the rubble, a small metal box wedged beneath collapsed stone. Inside were fragments of preserved documents, protected from moisture by wax seals. Conti carefully unfolded one brittle page. It listed a tribunal date, October 1893, defendant, Matteo Silvestri. Charge, sedition, sentence, undisclosed. At the bottom, a signature, Judge Lorenzo Montaluggi. Greco felt the temperature in the tent drop. Undisclosed sentence. Conti scanned the page again. Meaning no official record of execution or release. Rizzi's voice was barely above a whisper. Silvestri was a newspaper editor who accused the Montaluggi family of manipulating court rulings. Conti looked from the paper to the shattered prison walls. A journalist exposing corruption, a secret tribunal. Missing records, hidden chambers, and now the skeletons buried beneath stone. But just as they prepared to catalog the new evidence, a lab technician rushed toward them, face pale. "You need to see this," he said, holding up a fresh DNA report. They had run a quick comparison against public ancestry databases. The skeleton from the sealed corridor had a living descendant. A direct match, last name, Montaluggi. The tent fell silent. Because if one of the bodies buried beneath Borgo Prison belonged to a member of the very family that once controlled it, then this wasn't just a story about corruption, it was a story about betrayal. And as Conti stared at the ancient ruins illuminated against the Roman night, one question echoed louder than the sirens that had started it all. Who betrayed whom? And what else was still hidden beneath the history they thought they understood? In the heart of Rome, a demolition project at the old Borgo Prison unearthed a nightmare. Not just rubble, but a sealed chamber, hidden for over 100 years. Inside, skeletons. And this is where our story begins. The name Montaluggi spread through the city, not in headlines, but in hushed whispers. Detective Alessio Conti knew this wasn't just history bubbling to the surface, it was history fighting its way out. A sealed tomb, skeletons dated after the prison officially closed, and a direct DNA link to one of Rome's most powerful families. Inspector Marta Greco confirmed his fears. "The DNA match is solid," she told him. "The remains share a 99% lineage with Vittorio Montaluggi, current head of the Montaluggi Foundation." The Montaluggi family were modern-day saints, funding museums, universities, and judicial reform. But their past was far darker. In the late 1800s, they were gatekeepers of justice. Conti managed to secure a meeting with the man himself. At his lavish estate, Vittorio Montaluggi greeted them with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I assume this is about the unfortunate discovery at Borgo," he said smoothly. Conti didn't waste time. "Your family's DNA was found on one of the remains." Vittorio was unshaken. "My family has lived in Rome for centuries. That is hardly shocking." "The remains date to after the prison was officially closed," Greco pressed. "Tragic, if true," Vittorio replied. "But I fail to see my connection." Conti played his next card. "We found old tribunal documents. A prisoner named Matteo Silvestri accused your ancestor, Judge Lorenzo Montaluggi, of manipulating court rulings. Silvestri then vanished without a trace." Vittorio's smile thinned. "Baseless accusations. My ancestors lived in turbulent times. Implying my family buried people alive borders on defamation. One of the skeletons is genetically tied to you," Greco stated plainly. For the first time, Vittorio's composure flickered. "What are you suggesting?" Perhaps, Condi said quietly, someone within your own family was silenced. The air grew cold. Vittorio walked to the window. My great-grandfather had a brother, Alessandro Montallucci, a radical. He disappeared in 1902 after claiming the courts were corrupt. He turned back, his expression now guarded. If my ancestor is among those remains, he paid the price for reckless accusations, or for knowing too much, Condi countered. The investigation was escalating. A new scan of the site revealed a secondary tunnel leading away from the prison, under city property. Officials stonewalled them, delaying permits. Then, Dr. Elena Rizzi, the historian who first warned them, went missing. Her apartment was locked from the outside, her laptop gone. On her whiteboard, a chilling message: Alessandro knew everything. Condi's mind raced, not Alessandro Montallucci from the past. He pulled the demolition crew manifest, Alessandro Vitali, a structural engineer. A background check revealed a hidden detail. His maternal grandmother was a Montallucci, from a distant branch of the family. Security footage showed Vitali entering the restricted wing alone just minutes before the explosion that revealed the chamber. It wasn't an accident. Someone wanted those bodies found. They tracked Vitali's movements. His apartment was empty, but in a locked drawer, they found his journal. He wrote of whispered family secrets, of a great-uncle who vanished, of hidden chambers, and of shame. One entry read, "If the truth is buried beneath stone, then the stone must fall. Even if it destroys us." He triggered the demolition on purpose. He wanted to expose a century-old crime, but just as they prepared to issue a warrant, a call came in. A body was found in the river. It was Alessandro Vitali. And pinned to his jacket, a scrap of old parchment, torn from a ledger. The faded ink read, "Sentence to be concealed," and beneath it, the unmistakable signature of Judge Lorenzo Montallucci. The message was clear. Someone in the present was willing to kill to protect the sins of the past. Vitali hadn't just uncovered a historical crime, he had awakened a modern-day killer. And for Condi and Greco, digging into Borgo's past was becoming more dangerous with every step. If you love a good mystery, make sure to subscribe and follow our channel. We're just getting started on this case, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching. Alessandro Vitali's death was ruled a homicide within 24 hours. Water in the lungs confirmed drowning. Bruising around the wrists suggested restraint. There were no defensive wounds, which meant he had likely known the person who got close enough to overpower him. Detective Alessio Condi stood in the autopsy room, staring at the still form of the man who had brought Borgo Prison's secrets back into the light. He wasn't running, Inspector Marta Greco said quietly. He was exposing something. Condi nodded. And someone decided that couldn't happen. The journal recovered from Vitali's apartment became the key to everything. In its final entries, he described discovering a concealed structural void beneath the West Wing months before demolition approval. He had quietly accessed old municipal blueprints, ones that showed the prison's official layout. But he had also found a second set of drawings, an official, hand-sketched, marking a supplementary chamber not recorded in city archives. The handwriting on the margin was barely legible, but Vitali had circled it in red ink. L.M. Lorenzo Montallucci. The judge whose signature appeared on the tribunal document condemning Matteo Silvestri to an undisclosed sentence. Greco exhaled. So the chamber wasn't rogue construction. It was ordered, and deliberately erased from record, Condi replied. They returned to the secondary tunnel that extended beneath municipal property. With mounting political resistance, excavation finally began under court order. The air inside the tunnel was thick and unmoving, preserved in darkness for over a century. At its end stood a reinforced iron door, smaller than the main chamber's entrance, but heavier. No lock remained, just deep gouge marks along the frame. Inside, they found no bodies. Instead, they found a room built not for confinement, but for deliberation. A hidden tribunal chamber, a long stone bench. Iron candle mounts fused into the walls, scratched initials carved into the surface of the central table. This was where sentences were decided away from public record. Greco ran her hand across the stone. They didn't just imprison people here. They judged them in secret. Condi's gaze moved to a stack of brittle parchment left inside a sealed wall niche. Miraculously preserved, official decrees, tribunal transcripts, confessions written under visible coercion. One document stopped him cold. Case, Alessandro Montallucci. Charge, Conspiracy against family and court authority. It was signed not by Lorenzo Montallucci alone, but by 3 other prominent judicial figures of the time. The final line read, sentenced to be executed in perpetuity and erased from public record. Greco felt her pulse spike. Executed in perpetuity. Meaning not just death, Conti said quietly, but erasure, no grave, no mention. No memory. Alessandro Montallucci, the radical ancestor Vittorio had mentioned, hadn't disappeared in chaos. He had been condemned by his own bloodline. The skeleton found shackled in the sealed corridor likely belonged to him. And the second skeleton beneath the rubble, Matteo Silvestri, the journalist, had suffered the same fate for exposing it. The Montallucci family hadn't just protected power, they had protected themselves. As news of the hidden tribunal chamber spread through internal channels, political pressure intensified. Calls came from high-ranking officials urging caution, advising restraint, warning of reputational damage to Rome's historic institutions. But Conti had crossed too far to retreat. He requested another meeting with Vittorio Montallucci. This time, it was not cordial. They met inside the Montallucci estate once more, but the warmth from their previous encounter was gone. You found it, Vittorio said before Conti could speak. The tribunal chamber, Conti replied. Your ancestor ordered secret trials. He sentenced his own brother to be erased. Vittorio's face hardened. You're judging a century-old decision without understanding the context. Context, Greco snapped. They silenced a journalist and murdered a family member to preserve reputation. Vittorio stepped forward, his voice low. Rome was unstable. Political factions threatened to fracture governance. Public accusations would have destroyed the court system, so they destroyed people instead, Conti said. Silence filled the room. Then Conti placed Vitale's journal on the table. He wanted the truth out. And now he's dead. Vittorio's composure cracked for the first time, his jaw tightened. I did not order that, but someone connected to your family did, Conti replied. Vitale exposed the chamber. He triggered the demolition deliberately. Someone feared what he'd reveal next. For the first time, Vittorio looked uncertain. There are others, he admitted quietly, distant relatives, investors, board members who sit on foundations tied to the family name. If the Montallucci legacy collapses, they lose influence, and some people kill to protect influence, Greco said. Within 48 hours, financial records revealed significant transfers between a Montallucci-affiliated trust and a private security firm. The firm's director had been present near the river the night Vitale drowned. He was arrested attempting to leave Italy. Under interrogation, he broke. Vitale had contacted him weeks earlier, requesting a private meeting. He had claimed to possess evidence that would rewrite Rome's legal history. The security director alerted a board member tied to the Montallucci Foundation. They panicked. Their fear wasn't about the past. It was about modern contracts, political alliances, and international investments tied to the family's image of integrity. Vitale was lured to the river under the pretense of negotiation. He never left alive. The arrests that followed sent shockwaves through Rome's elite circles. Several board members resigned. Criminal charges were filed for obstruction, conspiracy, and homicide. But Vittorio Montallucci was not among those charged. There was no evidence he ordered violence. Only evidence that his family's history had been darker than anyone imagined. Weeks later, Borgo Prison's ruins were declared a protected historical site. Not as a monument to justice, but as a memorial to its manipulation. A plaque was installed at the entrance, bearing the names recovered from the hidden tribunal transcripts, including Matteo Silvestri and Alessandro Montallucci. Conti stood before it on a quiet evening, tourists unaware of the ground beneath their feet. History had nearly erased them, nearly. Greco joined him, hands in her coat pockets. Do you think it's over? Conti didn't answer immediately. Because in his pocket was a letter delivered anonymously that morning. No return address. Inside was a single, yellowed fragment torn from another ledger. Different date, different name, different prison. And beneath it, in faded ink, the same chilling line, sentence to be concealed. Conti folded the paper slowly. Borgo Prison had fallen, its secrets had surfaced. But if one hidden tribunal existed in Rome's past, how many others remained buried elsewhere? He looked once more at the ancient stone, at the names finally restored to memory. Justice had caught up to history this time, but history, he knew, had a habit of repeating itself. And as the sun dipped behind the Vatican walls, casting long shadows across the ruins, one truth lingered heavier than the rest: some prisons are demolished. Some crimes are prosecuted, but some systems are built to survive.